I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today, sisters. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Racism. Anything said or done, directly or indirectly, on the basis of race. This is a paraphrasing of the popular definition of racism, for which I have 2 reasons for doing so. As for the first reason, I'll return to that later on in the video. But the second reason is because just about any dictionary you read, you will almost always come across a different interpretation of this word. This is so because the term racism, along with many others I'll be covering over the course of this series, is so relentlessly contorted and abused by the left to their fitting, so they can further pollute race relations within our societies, politics, and culture. When you align and compare the definitions from just about every dictionary you come across, along with every mainstream educational, corporate, media, political, and cultural institutions, you will find that each and every definition will have at least one very pivotal thing in common. In one way or another, all mainstream interpretations of racism condemn anything at all, whether good or bad or neutral, that has any ties to race, and has done so in such a way that has now made it taboo to even think about the concept. This word in particular, and its current politically and culturally accepted meaning, unlike most other insults on the list, is a rather loaded term. While racism, like all the others, is a word used to single us out and to demonize us, it also goes far beyond just white people. It encompasses everyone to a degree. Our modern society is structured around this accepted definition of racism. Alongside that, it is also important to note the origins of the modern meaning of racism. The meaning of this term is derived from the liberalized version of it. In other words, the modern popular definition of racism, the one we accept and embrace today, is the liberal definition of racism. That is its roots. And this meaning of racism was particularly brought to prominence by none other than Martin Luther King Jr., specifically through his "I Have a Dream" speech. There is a reason why every mainstream public figure very often quotes from or refers to this speech when trying to virtue signal to the masses. Now, there are really 2 primary interpretations of this word in our modern society: the universal and the anti-white. The universal definition is that which I gave at the start of the video and applies to all. As for the anti-white, you can think of that as a branch off from the universal, and as the phrase suggests, this one strictly applies to us. Beginning with what I think is the simpler of the 2 to unpack, the word racist, under the anti-white context, is now exclusively used to condemn just about anything white people say and do today. racist has basically become interchangeable with whiteness, and it's become so obvious in recent years that we have now come to call it for what it is: anti-white racism. However, our political and media elites don't typically say the phrase anti-white racism when referring to anyone or anything associated with white people or their doings. They, for now, usually hide the anti-white part from the public and just go with the word racism. It's one of those things where just about everyone knows which group of people is being referred to when someone hollers racist at the top of their lungs, but no one openly mentions the color of that group. Not yet, anyways. But as the madness continues to descend over us, it will become more and more acceptable to openly and directly call out white people, as they do in South Africa.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I'm saying to you, we have not called for the killing of white people, at least for now. I can't guarantee the future.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd understand somebody watching that, especially as it gets shared on Twitter, they freak out. It sounds like a genocidal call.
Cry babies. Cry babies.
I'm not calling for the slaughter of white people, at least for now.
I can't give a guarantee of the future.
So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. They feel a terrible pain because you have touched a white man. But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
Anti-white racism is especially prevalent when white people do anything that is perceived to exclusively benefit themselves at the cost of other groups, or to disparage non-whites. Anti-white racism is non-whites taking their grievances and blaming us for their unfortunate situations. Anything at all that puts them at a disadvantage, anything that doesn't go their own way, anything that causes them to suffer, anything that places non-whites into bad circumstances and perpetuates those bad circumstances is the fault, and only the fault, of white racism. On the other end, anything that benefits us in any way, anything that makes us more successful, anything that puts us ahead of other groups of people in society, and anything that is uniquely and distinctively white, is also racist. And the trends and events seem to show that what is deemed as racist by white people is becoming increasingly generalized towards their every action.
Was it racist to knock a black man out? That is the question of the week.
No, stop asking me that. I said no.
It's not racist.
It's a shitty question. It's a sport.
Why is it a shitty question? Why is it a shitty question?
Because how does this have anything to do with race? It doesn't.
It's a fine question. We got to wake you up. You got to be a part of this conversation.
I'm old enough to remember a time when just individual and exceptional cases carried out by whites made the news and were branded as racists. Of course, there still existed a major prejudice against them, but such public incidents were far less common back then, as compared to today. But now, just going to school, making a living, having white children, listening to classical or country music, and even watching birds, yes, birds, are all racist. Just living our daily lives is racist, and will soon become a criminal act. We are solely responsible for their dysfunction and misery, whether we had anything to do with it or not. When in doubt, white racism. Now, any racially conscious white person is aware of these facts, but while white people are the primary targets of this slur, this word encompasses more than just white folks. It encompasses all of society. As leftists often say, it's a systemic issue. This brings us to the universal notion of racism. Universal racism seeks to completely discredit and disregard race of any merit or relevance from our personal lives to how society functions. From how resources are allocated among citizens to how the laws that govern us are written, race is nearly always excluded of any consideration of how society ought to be structured and operated. Even suggesting the idea would be taken as primitive and immoral, and quite possibly Nazi. And those rare but increasing instances of when race is included in legislation is when it's intended to exclusively support minorities.
Our focus will be on small businesses on Main Street that aren't wealthy and well-connected, that are facing real economic hardships through no fault of their own. Our priority will be Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American-owned small businesses, women-owned businesses, and finally having equal access to resources needed to reopen and rebuild.
As mentioned before, what we know to be as racist today was popularized by the liberals. Liberalism's approach to racism is essentially the colorblind mentality, and that is exactly what they seek to create, a colorblind society. The "I don't see color, I don't see race, race does not matter to me, I judge an individual based on their personal merit and character, and not by their skin color." And since this mentality is now orthodoxy, anything said or done in the name of race, any policy passed in the name of race, anything at all considered or even insinuated in the name of race, anything done opposite of that, is therefore morally wicked, and of course, racist. But this is simply just not rooted in reality. But this is now the adopted outlook on race across the Western world, but most notoriously in America. Now that I have gone over the common understanding of what racism is, I want to reveal what racism actually is. But for this particular word, there is a catch. You see, I can't just pull out any source and lay out the definition, because as far as I'm aware, there is literally no source that correctly defines racism. Even the most official and relied upon dictionaries, such as Oxford and Merriam-Webster, get it wrong, probably intentionally. Returning back to that one reason I skipped at the start of this video, here it is. There is no correct definition of racism that exists within the mainstream. As I stated before, any definition used by society in one way or another revolves around the popularly conceived notion of this term. But if you're able to bypass all the emotions, politics, and propaganda that surround this term, and examine the word with common sense and a realistic mind, you will notice that anything said or done, directly or indirectly, on the basis of race, just doesn't make sense. Such a definition does not at all seem to align with basic human behavior, and it's for this reason that I have, quote-unquote, invented my own definition of racism. Now, I know this sounds rather loathsome and ironic. White people are fed up with the meaning of this word constantly changing, and want only to rid themselves of it, not to sit down and reimagine it. I get it, I really do. But when considering that our entire civilization is running on this one single word, like coffee in the morning, a sober approach is desperately needed. My definition is actually not far off from the current one being used. In fact, it picks off from the popular definition word for word, but with one very crucial addition at the end. With that said, my proposed definition is thus: racism, anything said or done, directly or indirectly, on the basis of race, with malicious intent. Unlike the popular, this definition actually takes into consideration the reality of race, for not just whites, but for all of humanity, and thus accurately and fittingly applies to it. I don't deny that racism exists. It very well does exist. White people experience it every day. But for us, as well as society more broadly, racism is in dire need of an accurate definition that can be appropriately applied not to all racial words and actions, but to only malicious words and actions perpetrated in its name, or else we are all racist. An accurate definition will clear up all the confusion surrounding racism and make it easier to understand and how not to practice it. Think about it. We do so many things on the basis of race, sometimes every day. We make some of our biggest life choices in the name of race. Who we decide to surround ourselves with, who our friends are, who we choose to date, marry, and especially have children with. Even where we decide to live, whether a neighborhood, or a small town, or a country, or even a continent. To put this into perspective, taking a broad example, if I amass an army, march into a faraway foreign country, conquer and enslave the people of that land, because I believed that they were less human solely because of their race, then that would demonstrate an act with malicious intent on the basis of race, and would thus be racist. But if I exclude millions of foreigners who seek to immigrate and settle into my country with the intention of maintaining an overwhelming majority of my fellow kinsmen, that I would not call racist. I am excluding foreigners on the basis of their race, not because I have malicious feelings or intentions towards people of other races, but because I wish to preserve my country as the homeland for my people. Another example, this time from an individual approach. If I am walking down the street, and I spot an individual who is a member of a specific racial group, and I go out of my way to cross the street onto his side and viciously beat him up only because of his race, then that would be considered racist. However, if I'm walking down one side of the street and I see an individual, someone who I don't know and have never met, who is a member of a certain racial group that is known to commit the highest rate of violent crime in the city, and I decide to quickly cross the street and walk on the other side of it, that would not be considered racist. In the first scenario, I assaulted the individual for no other reason than because of his race. In the second scenario, I avoided the individual for my own safety, because I am equipped with no other information about him other than his racial appearance, and the fact that his racial group is linked to high rates of violent crime. In both scenarios, I'm acting on the basis of race, but only in one am I doing so with malicious intent. When I am placed into difficult or dangerous circumstances, with a man I do not know, I am left with no other choice but to only judge him based on his race, along with other general attributes. Aside from the most fanatical members within the diversity cult, who are determined to forcibly mix up everything in their lives, probably many, if not most liberals and leftists, along with the masses of ordinary people, live their lives, one way or another, in racial terms. But I'm sure the majority of them aren't even aware of this reality. The masses of people today have been trained not to be. And for those who are aware, they go to great lengths to actively suppress it. They either think what they're doing is immoral or anti-progressive, or they just don't want to admit it. By stripping the left of its power to play around with the word racism and its meaning, we can be one step closer to restoring race in our society as a normal topic of discussion and practice among our people, and make it once more acceptable to engage in the natural experiences race has to offer without being punished for doing so. Now you know the truth. Now it's time to act.